Everyone grabs his beer, and let's talk some true crime. Cary Stayner's younger brother, Stephen, was kidnapped in 1972, and Stayner said he felt neglected by his parents while dealing with the disappearance. When Stephen escaped after 7 years in captivity, there was a massive media attention on the family. The focus was not on Cary, though, which is why so many people didn't notice him turning into quite a troubled young man. The abduction of 7-year-old Stephen Stayner was a major event in Cary Stayner's life. He was 11 years old at the time, and not only did he lose his brother, but his parents were now constantly grieving the loss of their youngest child. He just up and disappeared. Was he still alive? Was he being harmed? There were no answers, and that despair lasted for 7 years when Stephen miraculously escaped from his captor, Kenneth Parnell. In 1989, Stephen died in a motorcycle accident. And then, the following year, Cary Stayner's uncle, Jerry Stayner, was murdered. Cary was living with Jerry at the time of the murder, and no arrests were ever made. Stayner attempted suicide in 1991 by carbon monoxide poisoning. He checked himself into the Mercer County Mental Health Facility, believing that he was having a mental breakdown. In 1995-1997, he was arrested for possession of marijuana and methamphetamines. In 1997, he was hired as a handyman at the Cedar Lodge, just outside of the Ark Rock entrance to Yosemite National Park. He worked there for almost 2 years, and it seemed like the perfect job for him. He had full access to Yosemite, which was a place he truly loved. He would occasionally smoke some pot and lay out in the sun. On February 12, 1999, Carol Sund, her 15-year-old daughter, Julie, and their 16-year-old foreign exchange student, Silvina Pelosso, traveled from Eureka, California's Cedar Lodge in El Portal. They arrived at the lodge on the 14th. The following day, the 3 women hiked all over the park, exploring the trails and viewing the giant sequoia trees. Later that evening, they rented some movies at the largest customer service desk and settled into their room for the night. Little did they know that they had been stalked since they arrived at the park. Stayner had been watching the mother and 2 teen girls since the previous night. After peeping at them through one of the windows in their room, he decided to make his move. He knocked on the door and told the occupants that he needed to fix the fan in their bathroom. He recalled seeing the movie Jerry Maguire playing on the television as he pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and ordered Carol, Julie, and Silvina to lie face down on the floor. He used duct tape to restrain their hands and gag all 3 of them. He later told investigators that he put the teenaged girls in the bathroom and then strangled Carol with a 3-foot piece of rope. He explained during his confession, quote, "And I didn't realize how hard it is to strangle a person," Stayner said. "It took 5 minutes to strangle the woman to death. It's not easy. I had minimal feeling. It was like performing a task." He took Carol's body outside and put it in the trunk of her rental car. When he went back into the room, he brought both girls out of the bathroom and cut their clothes off. He attempted to get them to engage in sexual acts with each other, but they wouldn't cooperate. After becoming irritated by Silvina as constantly crying, he took her back into the bathroom and strangled her. He then raped Julie in the room that they had rented. But when the girl asked to go to the bathroom, he took her into the room next door so she wouldn't see Sylvia's body. He then raped her again in that room before leaving her tied up on the bed. He put Sylvia's body in the car's trunk with Carol's and cleaned up the rented room. He removed all of his victims' belongings from the room and left the key on the room's desk. When the housekeeping staff went into the room the next morning, they just assumed the group had checked out as people regularly leave the keys in the room. When they did so, nothing was out of place, and there were no foul play signs. Investigators said that he had even made sure to remove his own hairs from the bed. At about 4 a.m. Stayner put Julie in the rental car and started driving around. As the sun started coming up, Stayner parked the car near Lake Pedro, a few hours west of Yosemite, and carried Julie a betrayal to a clearing. He sexually assaulted her one more time before brushing her hair and cutting her throat. He said he looked away as she died. He then hid her body in the brush and left. He drove the rented red Pontiac Grand Prix about an hour northeast on Highway 108 and went as far into the woods as he could. Then he stole the cash out of Carol's purse and took a cab back to Yosemite. A few days later, he returned to the car and used a pocket knife to scratch quote, "We have Sarah" end quote on the hood of the car while driving around before being killed. Julie had told Stayner that her name was Sarah. He then poured gasoline on the car and lit it on fire with Carol and Silvina's bodies still in the trunk. In an effort to throw off authorities, Stayner drove 2 hours west to Modesto and dropped Carol's wallet on a street corner. When Carol, Julie, and Silvina didn't return home from their trip, Carol's husband, Jen's son, called the police to report his family missing. When investigators learned that the rental car had never been returned, the search was on for the 3 missing women. During the month-long missing person search, Carol's wallet was found on the street in Modesto, and it did throw off the investigation. They did focus a lot of energy on Modesto's search efforts, but eventually, the burnt-out rental car was found by a hiker in the woods off Highway 108. The FBI arrived on the scene and found 2 bodies in the trunk that were burned beyond recognition. Dental records confirmed that they were the bodies of Carol and Silvina. Julie was still missing, and authorities were not hopeful that she was still alive. Carrie Stayner sent a letter to the FBI with a hand-drawn map of Julie's body's location. The top of the note read quote, "We had fun with this one" end quote. Authorities found Julie's body at the location depicted on the map. Investigators had 4 men listed as their main suspects. All had criminal records, and most were sex offenders. They had another 7 people on the list that were heavily investigated as either being witnesses or accomplices. Their main suspect was a man who had just shot a Modesto police officer and was currently in jail. 2 of the other 4 main suspects were also in jail due to parole violations. Police interviewed Stayner since he worked at the Cedar Lodge at the time of the women's disappearance. But since he was clean-cut and had no criminal record outside of a marijuana charge, he was never considered a suspect, even though they had no evidence to charge anyone. Authorities believed the murderer was already in jail. On July 22, park rangers found the body of 26-year-old Joey Ruth Armstrong. Her body was decapitated, and her head was found in a nearby body of water. Joey was a naturalist at the Yosemite Institute, now called Nature Bridge. She lived in a cabin with her boyfriend and another roommate in the Yosemite Valley, about 15 miles east of El Portal. Her job at the institute was to lead visiting kids through the trails and teach them about the local plants and animals. On July 21, Joey had returned home from work to an empty cabin. Her boyfriend and roommate were both out of town, and she had told a coworker that she was nervous about being at her cabin alone. She had a trip planned for the next day, so she spent the evening packing her truck in preparation to leave. In the morning, Stayner pulled up next to her cabin, got out, and asked if she had ever seen Bigfoot. When he was sure she was alone, he pulled a gun and told her to go into the cabin. Once inside, he tied her hands and put duct tape over her mouth, and then loaded her into the passenger seat of his International Scout. Before he was able to get off of the dirt road that led to her cabin, Joey managed to jump from the vehicle and run toward a friend's cabin that was nearby. Stayner sprung from the Scout and managed to catch up with her. He grabbed her from behind and sliced his knife along her throat. He continued to slash at her neck until she was completely decapitated. He hid her body in the brush and discarded her head about 40 feet away. As he was driving out of the area, his vehicle broke down, and he had to hitch a ride with a passing park ranger. The ranger would later say that nothing seemed unusual about the man when he gave him a ride to the Cedar Lodge. A witness told investigators that there was a blue International Scout parked outside of Joey's cabin the night she was murdered. That information led them to Carrie Stayner, who they interviewed and searched his backpack and vehicle before letting him go. When they searched his apartment, though, they found evidence linking him to the murder of Joey Armstrong. Eventually, they found evidence that linked him to the murders of Carol Sund, Julie Sund, and Silvina Pelosso. On July 24, 1999, Stayner was arrested for murder while being interrogated. He told investigators that he would tell them everything if they provided him with a big stack of child porn. He also demanded that his family get the $250,000 reward offered by Carol's sons, husband, and the family. His last demand was to be housed in a new federal prison built near his hometown in California. Authorities granted him none of these requests. They surely couldn't provide him with child pornography. They had no control over the reward money or over what facility he would be housed in. An FBI agent on the case said Stayner also asked him to get a hold of some producers in Los Angeles. He wanted a movie to be made about him, just like the movie about his brother when he escaped captivity in 1980. Clearly, some pent-up resentment against his brother was going on despite not receiving any of what he asked for. Stayner eventually confessed to everything. He told investigators that he had fantasies about killing women since he was 7 years old. He gave details about the murders that nobody but the killer would have known. He gave them the knife that he used to kill Joey Armstrong. He apologized to the victims' families and said, quote, "I wish I could have controlled myself and not done what I did." If that wasn't enough, Stayner also told investigators that his original plan was to kill his girlfriend and then rape and kill her 2 daughters, who were 8 and 11 years old. He claimed to have attempted to carry out his plan on multiple occasions, but one of the times, he chickened out, and another, he could not locate his girlfriend and her daughters. He originally took a plea deal to avoid the death penalty but ended up pleading not guilty because of insanity. At trial, his lawyers claimed that his family had a history of sexual abuse and mental illness, which caused him to commit the murders. Psychiatrists that testified for the prosecution claimed that though he did suffer from the obsessive-compulsive disorder, mild autism, and paraphernalia, he was saying and knew what he was doing at the time that the crimes were committed. On August 27, 2000, Cary Stayner was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death and is currently on death row at San Quentin Penitentiary. California has not carried out any executions since 2006, so he will likely die in prison. He is 59 years old. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you like this video, please hit subscribe, click like, or leave me a comment. /support. Thank you again for your support.